My name is Rex Dufour. I work for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, known as NCAT. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. We manage something called the ATRA project. It's a very useful informational resource for farmers. We also manage a couple toll-free lines, so you can talk to a live person about any question you have related to organic or sustainable production of or marketing of crops or livestock. So that's my commercial. The ATRA website is here under my contact information. So I just wanted to show this slide. This is from New Hampshire, so not anywhere near California, but it happened just a few days ago. A friend and coworker that manages the NCAT's New Hampshire office said they got 9 inches of rain in New Hampshire over the course of about a day and a half. This was flatland before, and now it's this 30-foot gully, maybe more than 30 feet, I don't know. But just to emphasize the fact that, climate change is happening right now, as Ben pointed out, and we need to do everything possible to support developing resilient soils. We don't know where the next atmospheric river or drought or, heat wave will strike, but we're all headed into uncharted weather territory. And the question is, are your soils ready to withstand the stresses and impacts of drought, high temperatures, and intense rain events? So got to get them prepared, and healthy soils are a good way to do that. And just a reminder, cover crops are just one tool among many, which NRCS and CDFA, California Department of Food and Ag, their Healthy Soils program subsidize. Compost, NRCS is coming out with a new soil carbon 808 interim practice. So California is one of 12 or 14 states that signed up for this. CDFA also has a cost share on compost. And I guess I'm kind of advocating, like, you could use all of these practices to get your soils up to snuff. Mulch, Ben mentioned mulch around the base of the trees. NRCS and CDFA will pay you to do that, at least partially subsidize that. Habitat plantings, again, Ben mentioned hedgerow, there's conservation cover. There's a lot of different ways you can diversify the alleys or your edges with annual or perennial plantings. And NRCS and CDFA have cost shares for that. Irrigation water management is going to be critical. As Mark Twain said, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over, and that's what we're going to be doing in California when SGMA really starts hitting the ground. You want to irrigate sufficiently so your trees stay alive, but you don't want to over irrigate, because then you're flushing the nitrogen and right past the root zone. And so there's cost shares, nutrient management, getting your figuring out your nitrogen additions either from your groundwater and or cover crop and or other sources. So, and just to remember and keep in the back of your mind, in my experience, and I'll admit, I have never planted a cover crop in an avocado orchard, but I have helped plant cover crops in almond orchards and walnut orchards and pecan orchards. And so I think there's some cross-learning lessons. But cover cropping and managing a cover crop is as much of an art as it is a science, because you're dealing with limited time, limited finances, limited equipment, and limited ways to manage and terminate the crop. Anyway, so what I'm going to cover is just a couple of the challenges to cover cropping in San Diego and other locations down there. Goals for the cover crop, just touch on irrigation considerations. What species, I'm going to just touch on that because Margaret covered that very well. How to plant the cover, just how will you manage and terminate the cover, because those are important considerations, and a little bit about cover cropping in pecans. That's a project I'm working on right now. So some challenges. Well, clearly, it's hilly terrain. which is pretty unfriendly to how folks generally up here in the Sacramento Valley plant cover crops using seed drills or, broadcast or no-till seed drills are increasingly being used because people are wanting to maintain a mulch. Flail mowers, also heavy equipment, probably don't do very well going up and down these steep hillsides. Ring rollers and roller crimpers in order to, manage the mid-season cover crop. Those are maybe not very usable on these steep hillsides. I had talked with Joel briefly yesterday about some of the problems he's having. I'll mention just if you're on steep hillsides, you may have to go to broadcast because you can't get a seed drill down this hillside, I don't think. Maybe you can, I don't know. And you have expensive water. Probably San Diego County, I think, probably has the most expensive water in the whole country. So gotta watch the water and manage it, and manage your expectations too. So what do you want from your multifunctional cover crop? Well, erosion control, the slide I showed earlier. And, I think we don't know. I think generally the rains in San Diego probably historically have been rather, more gentle than like downpours. That's, in this case, past is not prologue. You want to have erosion control either through mulch or cover crops or something especially on these newly planted orchards and hillsides. Habitat and pest management, you can design your cover crop to provide nectar and pollen resources for beneficials and parasitic wasps and beneficial bees. Nutrients, they provide a lot of nutrients and micronutrients, or they help the microbiome, help the plant access micronutrients from the soil. Mulch, you can roll these cover crops and have a really good mulch, but what is your priority? Soil health and water infiltration, that is going to be increasingly important, I think, all over the state. Beauty, I think, is kind of an underrated aspect of cover crops and hedgerows, for example. But I think if you're doing any kind of agritourism, beauty, a beautiful cover crop is ecologically beautiful and physically beautiful. Do you want to reseed? Do you want your cover crop to reseed or make sure it's not reseeding? I've seen it go both ways, and having something like a small grain cover crop reseed and then become a weed, you don't want to do that. But in a perennial system, it's a little bit different. In a tree system, it's different. And then maybe you want a little bit of everything. This grower up here, this is a walnut orchard, and it's Dan Unruh. He really went to town on cover crops. This really provided, his initial use of cover crops started when his PCA came back with a Pratylincus nematode, a lesion nematode count of 5,000, which is pretty darn high and, in the economic range. Now his Pratylincus count is down below 100. He started off with just mustard cover crops, and then he bought this real fancy no-till seed drill with, I don't know, 10 or 12 different seed buckets. And so he plants, 3 or 4 legumes, 3 or 4 mustards, 3 or 4 small grains, and has a really diverse cover crop. Really beautiful to walk around in. And he doesn't have to supply very much nitrogen anymore at all to his walnuts. Irrigation considerations, if you're on drip on your avocados, it's just not going to do it for having a viable cover crop. You can depend on rain, and there's so many different microclimates in San Diego area and elsewhere. I think some places get adequate rain, or usually get adequate rain to bring up a cover crop, but if you're relying on drip, just doesn't get out to the center of the alley. A micro sprinkler and sprinkler, those are great, but the cost the additional cost perhaps of any additional water to keep the cover crop going, you have to judge that versus the benefits from the cover crop. And they are many. Cover crops, you know, they're inherently multifunctional. What species, I'm just going to touch on this because Margaret covered that quite well. But one, you know, do you want end fixing or not? The flowering window, because I'm really interested in habitat benefits, you know, like pollinator and parasite predator habitat. And the ease of management and termination, you know, if they get woody, as Margaret said, that's going to be really hard or more difficult for a flail mower or any kind of management to terminate that cover crop. So those are some considerations, you know. And just, I have some other resources. NCAT ATRA has a bunch of cover crop, kind of what species types of resources. CAF has come out with this cover crop decision guide for perennial cropping systems. That's pretty good, short and sweet. And Margaret has already mentioned this. This is a nice little publication. And also, you know, Sarah, it's managing cover crops profitably. That's a free PDF download. There's no reason for you not to have it. And it provides a lot of information about a lot of different cover crops. And I think it's undergoing a 4th edition now. This is the 3rd edition here. So planting considerations. This picture shows broadcast planter that we helped, and this goes back to equipment limitations. You know, like this almond grower had a fertilizer spreader, but he didn't have a seed drill. And so we said, okay, well, we'll go with that. But you have to calibrate these any, you know, seed drill or these kinds of fertilizer spreaders. We had to calibrate it. But you see in the foreground of that picture, the seeds are just sitting on top of the soil. And I encourage anybody that uses broadcast seeding to go back with a tractor, if you can, or an ATV that's dragging a chain behind it, or some tires or something, just to rough up the soil, increase the seed soil contact, because right there is a kind of a bird seed or a bird buffet. You know, they'll come down and eat half of those seeds before they can even germinate. Also, if you're a cover crop rookie, I suggest keeping it simple. You might want to start off with just a couple species in your mix, maybe 2 or 3. I think planting 1 species is a gamble. 2 species from different families provides what I call germination insurance, because every season is different these days. Well, in the past too. There are reports of very interesting and synergistic things that begin happening when you have a mix of 8 species or more in your cover crop. The diversity of root exudates that exists supports the microbial population and really kicks off the soil biology into high gear. Other considerations: seed size and seed cost. You don't want to you want to, the larger seeds especially, you got to get them into the ground because they don't do all that well in just germinating on top of the on top of the soil. And one of the resources I recommend, Cover Crops for Vegetable Systems, has a nice table in the front that has how many seeds per pound, which I find quite useful, because it, you know, say Phacelia has 250,000 seeds per pound versus, you know, cowpea, which has, I don't know, maybe 1,500 seeds per pound. I'm just pulling things out of the air here, but gives you a really good idea about seed size and potential cost. Legumes, no matter.
I hate to cut you off.
Yeah.
We are going to transition to the discussion in the next minute or two. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, I gotta hurry. Inoculate the legumes. If you broadcast, increase the seeding rate. Management and termination. You know, you have to figure out how are you going to terminate if you need to get into your orchard and you planted a tall cover crop or there was a lot of rain. There's going to be a lot of vegetative matter. How are you going to manage that vegetative matter, and is it going to interfere with your harvest or other operations? Mowing will impact beneficial populations. You want to figure out when is the most nitrogen, or if you're looking for seed set or most biomass, you got to kind of figure that out. And grazing, it's a great option. There's food safety considerations, but also there's, it's a whole nother ag operation. Just to show you, we were monitoring ladybird beetle populations, and this gray area shows the first mow of alternate rows, which is a way to conserve flowering and nectar resources. And after the second mow, the populations just plummeted. So mowing does have an impact on those. This is the cover crop in last year, about April, 12 different species. We tried experimenting with milkweed, showy and narrow leaf milkweed. We didn't find a single plant there. And just the beneficial populations we monitored, these were the different things we were monitoring for, but I put in this slide just because it shows the resiliency of this system. There's always beneficials out there, some kind of beneficials. And this is going on above the ground. Below the ground, the root exudates of all these cover crop species are providing a similar service. They support beneficial microbes that prevent nematodes and pathogenic microbes from creating problems. And so it's supporting plant health. Just a few very quick conclusions. You know, you won't know if your cover crop is working for your system until you try them for a few years. Don't give up if you don't get it right the first time. You know, 2 to 3 years is a minimum, I think. And like I said, NRCS and CDFA have cost share for these. Cover crops are multifunctional, but cover crop mixes can be customized to address your priorities as a grower. And then being observant, willing to experiment are important to successfully implement cover crops in your system. And here's some cover crop resources. I think Joel is going to put these in the chat. And here's some more cover crop resources. And